I would say that we can slowly start.
Okay.
So, hello everyone, good morning. When I was reading about the issue of missing persons, I came across a quote that said, when 16 potatoes get rotten, you are left without a lunch, not to mention 16 men. And in Kosovo, there is around 1,600 people that are still missing. The conversation about the missing and the search for them is not part of public discourse, despite their incredibly important role in dealing with the past process, as well as the negotiations between Belgrade and Pristina. My name is Anđela Savić from Youth Initiative for Human Rights, and today here with me I have Serbeze Haxhiaj, a journalist from Kosovo. She works for BIRN. Mirdita Serbeze.
Mirdita.
And we have here Predrag Miletić, a research and analyst and a database coordinator at Humanitarian Law Center in Belgrade. Ciao,
Hello, everybody.
Hello to everyone in the audience. I would like to inform you that the debate is being recorded, and to tell you that you can ask questions in the Q&A section, or you can raise hand, and we will give you the opportunity to speak. If we don't answer questions throughout our debate, we will definitely leave space for them at the end of the debate. So thank you everyone again. Serbeze and Peja, I first wanted to ask you, why is it that the missing persons issue is on the margins of public discourse? We have now negotiations between Belgrade and Pristina, and for the first time in years, the missing person issue is raised as a question and as a problem.
Personally, I have a very short answer on this question, because this issue is still on margins, because it has to do with the crimes, atrocities committed during the war, and it is issue of facing their crimes. That also the matter of willingness to take responsibility and to prosecute war crimes. So for that reason, I think they don't want to unfold this pressure of war. So
persecution of actually lack of the persecution from the authorities is the problem that is delaying the search for the missing, right?
Yeah, exactly, because killing civilians and hiding their bodies is one of the most heinous crimes committed during the war. So the main problem is this, because firstly, the bodies or remains of humans are not found yet, and above all, there is no justice, no justice has been served for those killings and disappearing of people.
Thank you.
Yes, I would agree definitely with Serbeze about the primary reason for why this issue of missing persons is on the margins. But at the same time, we are witnessing that even those missing that were found, exhumed, and handed over to the families, even there are very little investigations, criminal investigation resulted from that fact. So we will speak later, of course, about some cases, some of the recent cases, for example, Rudnica, where it's already 5 years left after the mass grave was found and exhumed and everything, and still there is no result in criminal investigation. And also for this question, I would just like to emphasize shortly that while here in Serbia and Kosovo, this issue is on the margins, in European Commission, instruments like, like a pre-accession assistance agreement, the missing persons issue is one of the central issues, and it's related to the negotiations between Belgrade and Pristina, because in the last few years we see a great commitment by European Union that this issue should be finally addressed in a more qualitative way.
What is the international community really doing to help solve this issue?
In fact, they are trying to make pressure and to push both sides to cooperate and to open up what they didn't open until now. But this international pressure was not so effective. So until now, we don't have much progress, especially in the recent years, because at least for over the last 5 years, we have very, very few people who were found or were identified. So this international, especially from European Union, in general, I can describe it as a weak pressure because it didn't produce any results in the recent years.
Would regional cooperation help speed up the process of the in search of the missing?
In fact, yes, because always there are some people who knows where are the missing persons. People were not disappeared by themselves. Somebody killed them and disappeared the bodies. So there always, and those people are not few. There are maybe a bunch of people, or in sometimes a chain of command, and in other cases, like in Kosovo, some individuals or groups who know where the bodies were hidden. So cooperation and investigation is at the core of this problem. Without cooperation, political will and justice system action, this problem cannot be solved. So cooperation and working hard in this issue, above all political will, is a must for this process.
When we are at the regional cooperation, there is the topic of opening archives that came up during the negotiations between Aleksandar Vučić and Mr. Hoti. Is it possible to solve the issue of missing persons without opening the secret archives of both Serbian army at the time and also the Kosovo Liberation Army?
I'm afraid not. Serbia and Kosovo have asked each other to open up military archives and to help reveal where the missing persons from the 1998-1999 war are buried. But despite this cooperative rhetoric, I think it's only a matter of rhetoric. No, it's not a matter of any real action or proper action. Neither appears likely to do it. So in Serbia, for example, most of the war crimes documents were classified. In Kosovo, former KLA leaders saying that we were really guerrilla group and we don't have proper archives or something structured or gathered during that time. So we don't have archives to open. Because you know that most of the Serbian people who went missing, they were after the war, shortly after the war. So it is especially after July until November 1999, most of the Serbian people and other communities were disappeared, killed and disappeared during that time. And KLA said that this time was the time when this guerrilla was demilitarized and it was only a matter of individuals or groups who committed those crimes. So they refused to take any responsibility for that period of time, which, you know, after the UN deployed its mission in Kosovo and NATO deployed its troops in Kosovo. So it was a kind of chaotic time when Kosovo was a of gangs or gang groups, and during that time most of the civilians from both minority groups, also some Albanians, were killed during that time. So for that reason they are just refusing or not to take responsibility for this kind of chaotic time after international missions deployed in Kosovo.
So it's basically like a game of ping pong.
Yeah, exactly.
They're refusing until the others want to cooperate. Peja, you mentioned the Rudnica mass grave. And when we talk about it, we also talk about the 37th Brigade, for which I believe the Humanitarian Law Center was denied access to the documents, wasn't it? And then Bratislav Gašić announced it as a state secret, right?
Yes, exactly. As we are speaking about the archives, firstly, I would wish to say that for the dossier that we have published very recently after the Rudnica was exhumed and after the victims were identified, we actually had used several very important documents that we have found on the ICTY archive, and one of them is it's a command for the assignation of terrain in which it's referenced directly to Rezala, which is a really great piece of information, that proves exactly which brigade was present at this time in Rezala on the 5th of April in 1999. Who reported the crime, who knew about the crime, and later, after the bodies were found, only 300 meters or something, on some close distance to barracks of Yugoslav army at the time. Nobody was, as far as we know, being questioned about this, and on this mass grave is built facility. This is a really good starting point, in order to investigate who ordered this to be built by which order or something. And also regarding the archives, HSC also published a couple of years ago a dossier about 125th Brigade, also using military documents found in our SCT archive regarding to event in Kraljane, in which somewhere around 80 people were killed in 3 days, and still there is around 40 people missing from this incident. And from the war diary of this brigade, we found one excerpt directly connecting this brigade that was present at the Kraljane site, and also in this war diary they were mentioning, some prisoners. So. Again, no reaction came from official after we also filed a criminal complaint on this. So, just to conclude, I think that the archives issue is very important, but we can't expect that these documents will reveal all by themselves location of mass graves. There have to be referenced and combined with other sources of information, but I think what's the most important on the top of just opening the archives is interviews with people that were involved in the operation of hiding. Because if we look at the Batajnica case in 2001, we can see that there is a large number of people was very involved, like drivers, divers, then people that were working some physical business about. So it's a large number of the people that should be interviewed, and information collected about this. And we all know that after Batajnica, this a criminal case is still open with no improvements. And just to conclude, and relating to what Serbeze said about the Kosovo Liberation Army, I read a press release at the BIRN that Serbeze was interviewing some I think war veterans from the KLA, and in fact, in just 3 click by your mouse, you can find in ICTY database that there is a lot of KLA documents, for example, in a Haradinaj case. So, for them to say, we didn't have any kind of document, it's, it's also indicative why they are saying that they were not, keeping any archive or records, because it's not true. KLA had an archive even in 1998, and some of those documents can be easily found. Of course, in those documents, there is no information about the mass graves, but you can see that the KLA structure was really military structure, with daily orders, daily reports, and things, So I'm not saying that the KLA archive could give some, clues and points about mass graves, but only the thing that they're denying existence of archive is very indicative. No matter what was the fate of those archives. Is it saved? Is it like at the Veterans Association or somewhere, or it's destroyed? But these are many starting points from which you can start. It's idea for prosecution or for the other institutions where they can start in their search.
Just to add something, it is really strange for public opinion in Kosovo. If they want for any, for example, research or something, for any study or something, there is no address where the archives or documents related to KLA are. So I spoke with several Kosovo Liberation Army leaders and asked just where is this documentation? I'm not saying that in this archives there are facts for crimes or for missing person. I'm just talking for the pure archive, communication, structure, some others, where those documents are actually, and nobody was able to answer to me where they are currently. So this is and it is a bit strange, and also it's a bit disappointing to say that public in Kosovo is not asking for this information. And it's kind of, it has remained something taboo, can I say so, because people are a bit afraid just to ask for some ordinary things, such as a kind of archive, without judging or without any prejudice that it has anything which can incriminate them. Or
just to add, I think the same situation in Serbia, because there are many people, and some of them I met, also I think that they have certain information that could lead, but they are in fear for their safety. Some of them are members of the police, or I think that they would give their acceptance to speak about it only if they get a passport of the foreign country and a lot of cash. This is the only condition. If they disappear, then maybe they can reveal some information. But to approach freely, they're not feeling safe to share those information.
It's really strange why you should classify this war documentation 20 years after the war. For example, in Serbia, why? Especially after ICTY and local courts that have prosecuted some of the Serbian army leaders. Why public opinion and justice system allow this issue to happen? Because why should put or classify this kind of documents 20 years after the war?
Yeah, I think that definitely all the war diaries from the brigades in Kosovo are in the Hague. Yeah. One thing I forgot to mention, with those sources you have to also be very careful, because some of the informations might be changed or forged, So, but the fact that information is changed is also indicative why the certain information is changed. So this is really something maybe beyond this conversation, but as I said, it could be useful, to open archives and to have somebody independent under some kind of, control to look at it. But generally, public in Serbia isn't quite aware, at the fact that those war brigade diaries are, sealed. Because this information circulate only in a limited circle of the people. Yeah. So general public is poisoned by official narratives, isn't aware of the fact and what these facts mean in a broader context, and especially for the fate of the missing persons, and how it can contribute. So it's all fragmented and
it's here and there the public is still divided alongside ethnic lines. So they don't want to. They just want to see the crimes of the other side, and it's a kind because the political propaganda has a huge impact on people. For that reason, they are just hesitant and sometimes reluctant to ask for some ordinary things or ordinary information, such as war crime archives or just archives of army or related to this.
Now that we, apart from the archives, mentioned the people who have some information, but yet they are not willing to speak, I would like us to talk more about that. And also we have Mr. Thomas Osorio in the audience with us, so he can maybe give us some insight on how was that going on in his work in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Croatia. So, Thomas, can we hear you?
Am I visible?
We don't see you, but we hear you.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. I think, you know, when I was first approached for this meeting, I was a little bit concerned because it was announced to be very much Serbia-Kosovo specific, and I have very little experience in dealing in these two countries. However, you know, looking back and sharing my experience related to the work with Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia, Bosnia, Croatia, there are many similarities. And I think, you know, the last topic, of course, was that you were discussing is, of course, dealing with the archives and the documents. And I've worked with this for many years. I mean, over 10 years, looking through documentation and so on for clues which might lead to missing and so on. I'd also like to remind that there is an ongoing effort right now with the MICT archive conducted by two staffers with the ICRC who are combing through some of the cases that were investigated but never prosecuted for maybe some clues for missing persons. Now, why I'm starting with that is because, you know, there are many assumptions about the archives and availability of documentation and where they are and so on. I think the general public believe that somehow there is a wealth of information which is somewhere. I mean, there may and there may not be. I think that you know, the point that Predrag made about the interviews of sources and the different starting points in gathering this information, I mean, this is all extremely necessary because not all the information is sealed, hidden, amended. It's simply a matter of getting access, which, once again, full circle, political will. So if we look at what we need to be doing, you know, on this International Day of Disappeared, I mean, this is not only specific for Kosovo, Serbia, but really globally, is, you know, what is the motivation to seek for missing persons from the duty bearers? I mean, I worked for the ICTY for 14 years, and for me, the missing is, of course, a first-rate judicial question. I know that one of the questions is the humanitarian aspect, but at the end of the day, there are duty bearers responsible for the search for missing persons. And so what is their motivation in terms of their accountability? Do they feel the obligation to perform the role that they're obliged to do? Number two, those within the system, do they have the authority as duty bearers? I mean, have they been delegated the authority to actually do the job? And number three, the capacity. Do they have the resources, the manpower, and the access that they need to do this? So, you know, the assumptions that it's strictly a political decision, yes, that is the starting point. Political will is absolutely the starting point. But then after that, there has to be, all of those three elements need to come together. And the last point that I'd like to make is what's happening today. The role of civil society has been critical. And a lot of very, very important information has been gathered by civil society, individuals, organizations, and different efforts to keep the topic alive with the general public, but also in the media and also with the politicians. So I'm going to stop there. I don't see you. It's very difficult for me to speak when I don't see. I see a black screen in front of me, so forgive me if I was jumping around a little bit.
No, you didn't. Thank you very much for this insight. I wanted to ask you, all three of you, do families have more trust in non-government organizations and independent journalists than into official institutions? Are they more willing to talk to humanitarian law center researchers or Serbeze, to you and other journalists, than they are to the officials? And if so, why?
In Kosovo, for example, there are the two different things. For example, if we talk to the Albanian families of missing persons, they believe to some extent, even to institutions. So, also, and less to journalists and civil society to some extent. But when it comes to Serbian families of missing persons, they don't believe in Kosovo institutions. They are more keen on talking or cooperate with the journalists and civil society than with the government or Kosovo institution. So it's a divided opinion or divided sentiment when it comes to trust to the institution. But in general, I think that civil society, for example, like Humanitarian Law Center, which is the most credible organization here in Kosovo and in Serbia, people believe much more on civil society in general, in research organization or something like this, much more than institutions, especially in Kosovo, because they see family members of Albanian missing persons see Serbia as a key for the finding the missing person. So they don't believe in Serbia's institutions when it comes to the trust to institution.
So people are divided also on that level.
Yeah, exactly.
People from Kosovo Albanians from Kosovo don't believe to Serbian institutions and vice versa. Yeah. Petra, do you have any insight on how humanitarian law centers researchers, how are they? Are families open to talk to them? How do they gain information?
Yeah, this is a little bit hard question because each family is different. You know, like from my personal experience interviewing families of the missing persons, which interviews were always the hardest one. You know, like much harder than interviewing like families of persons killed. You know, there are always different people and families. Some of them are under a great influence by mainstream narratives about the role of humanitarian law center. We all know that in Serbia it's very strong against. But I think that, you know, like people are in a larger extent, in a large percent, recognizing the fact that humanitarian law center worked in Serbia and in Kosovo, and for years it serves as a bridge between the communities, and this is very well recognized and accepted, and a lot of people whose attitudes could be, you know, like somehow different, they did recognize, and very rarely they didn't want to give an interview. But I also must say that our approach was a victim-centered approach, you know, mainly for the Kosovo memory book, you know. So we were researching, you know, like primarily the person's, like a victim's personal information, you know, like about giving the humanitarian dimension to, you know, like figures and the numbers. So just very rarely people refused, and HOC and researchers always try to help each of the family, you know, like pointing to institution, making connection with other, for, you know, like giving some kind of legal assistance when possible, and all the others. So, you know, like I think that work is recognized, but, you know, like there is all kind of different people, and people react differently to the fact that, you know, like there being a family of the missing persons. And I don't know, for the Association of Missing Persons here in Serbia, you can also say there are different ones. There are those that are under strong influence of the government's institutions and serve like, also to spread this official narrative, which is just, like a narrative that it's, that Serbs are only the victims, there is no other victims, and there is also other members of associations which are more open, and I think that they recognize that only chance for them to get some improvement of this issue is regional cooperation and cooperation with victims associations from Kosovo.
Thank you, Predrag, for that. Okay, if there is nothing Serbeze and Thomas would like to add on this, I wanted to ask you now that you touched your research/analyst work. You also work as a database coordinator, and I know that you wanted to show us certain documents that you found that you find to be interesting. So can we please take a look at them now and tell us what do you want to share?
Yeah, of course. Yesterday, when we were talking, like in preparation for this meeting, I thought that I could show several documents because, as I mentioned, for this Kosovo Memory Book project, we were surfing through the Inicijativa database and found many documents. So I mentioned to you, I mentioned Rudnica case, and I have mentioned a Kraljane case. But one more case that I would like to mention is Izbica case, because this is very interesting one. Because I wouldn't go much into details, but on the 28th of March 1999, around 110 people were killed in Izbica, and later in 11th of May, also in Izbica, additional 12 people were killed by Serbian military and police, and they were all buried in a grave in this village, buried by civilians and other, local villagers, and this mass grave became news. At the time of the war, so many international media agencies were reporting about this mass grave. So the Serbian military posted order that all those graves must be exhumed and taken into Mitrovica for abduction. And what happened is that from more than 120 bodies, only 101 body was in Mitrovica, and other bodies were transferred into the Petrovo Selo mass grave, so this is very indicative, and I could just show you, this document that I will show you is from, was admitted into the evidence in the Milosevic case, from the defense attorneys in 2005. So this is the location of, just one moment. This is the locations of graves of this 101 body. I don't know if you can see it now. This document, this is just one of my favorite. Serbian police from Mitrovica buried 101 bodies on the local Muslim cemeteries around Mitrovica. And this is the sketch of one of those graves. And you can see that those marked with the numbers are the victims that were, exhumed from Izbica, and this is the exact position of the graves. And what is problematic here? So Serbian institutions, they waited for 5 years, and even then they didn't give this document, for example, to UNIC or some other institution to help those bodies get exhumed and identified, which is an international obligation under international law. But they just use this document, to show in front of the Inicijativa how they were, taking care of everything. But, having in mind that this, from this transport of bodies, that more than, I think, around, I'm not sure about numbers, but around, I think, 40 bodies ended up in Petrovo Selo is enough information for the prosecutor to see who was in charge of the transport, you know. So there are a few other documents here, and all are signed, and people who were included in this are also listed their names. So, you know, many interviews could be done, and it's been almost 20 years from, you know, like exhumations, repatriation. These bodies from Kosovo, of course, those bodies that were buried around Mitrovica were exhumed and identified later by DNA method assisted by CNP, of course. But, you know, this process could be much faster if, you know, like Serbia fulfilled this obligation and transfer all the documents related to mass graves, but not mass graves, but graves that they were, you know, like that were people that were buried under their mandate or something, you know, during the war. So we are speaking about 5th of June, so it's just 5 days before military and police withdraw from Kosovo. They're also withdrawing bodies into Serbia in Petrovo Selo. So this is just one illustrative example how the ICTY database can use also for journalists and other, you know, like to research and gather information about this issue.
I wanted just to ask something, Peja. We still maybe don't have something clear. How much ICTY trials and local courts trials on war crimes have helped to find missing people? Still for us is a kind of unknown information if those trials, especially in high chain of command in Serbia during the ICTY trials and later, have helped, because I don't have it clear if those trials have helped to find any mass grave or to reveal further information about the missing person. Do you find anything during your research?
Not my research. Only case that I know, but you know, it don't take me 100% sure. But I know that in front of the Serbian war crime trials, there was one case, but it was related to the surrounding of Vukovar in Croatia. You know, so there was one crime in which one of the witnesses revealed the location of mass grave that was later exhumed. This is the only case I know, and you know, like still considering Vukovar, because Thomas said that these problems that Serbia and Kosovo are facing are not just exclusively related to those two states, but there are also same problems are in Bosnia and Croatia. There is still around 300 people from 1991, Vukovar still missing. You know, so if they are not in this part of Slavonia, of Croatia, where are these bodies? They also could be possibly in Serbia. So it's not just that the Kosovo victims are, you know, like most probably also somewhere in Serbia, but also Croatian victims. So this is the long-lasting practice of concealing evidences and hiding evidences, you know, like from the beginning of the war.
So it's kind of general perception to the family, so they can expect that somebody, the chain of command in Kosovo and Serbia, will face the trial. Nobody is expecting that this trial, if, for example, in Krusha case, Krusha massacres, recently was sentenced to one person for this, but the whole trial didn't reveal any detail, any trace of where the bodies were sent or when disappeared, when the bodies were hidden. So trials are not revealing any information about the bodies, where they are, where they hidden.
Yes, there is. Sorry, just a short related to Krusha. We also must admit that some of missing persons would never be found, and one of the examples would be a Krusha, because those people killed in Krusha were killed inside some old barn, which was later detonated, and then the machines and excavator just pulled all waste, or you know, like together with the bodies into Trinidad River. So the probability that some of the missing persons would be found in this case and some other cases is less likely to happen. And just about the chain of the command, it's more or less based, like on a document that were submitted to ICTY, but by Serbian institutions, it's the chain of command is more or less, it's well known. We know which brigade was responsible for which region in Kosovo, not in the tiniest details, but roughly, yes.
I think that Thomas would also be happy to help us answering these questions. Thomas, do trials help, and what is your experience with the ICTY?
Thomas, am I on? Okay.
Yeah.
So a very important piece of information, the starting point. The ICTY investigations were perpetrator driven. In other words, they dealt with the event and then looked down. Whereas domestic judiciaries, they start with criminal complaints, or they start with missing persons, or someone that's reported someone missing, or some information. So, and then they seek the area and so on. So the ICTY information in this regard is invaluable because it actually deals with the scope and nature of the crime base. It is also divided into two groups. It is the public information, which is available through the court cases, or those that have been publicly adjudicated. But there's also the information that I mentioned earlier, which is held by the OTP, which is the Office of the Prosecutor. And those were, many cases that are investigated, as I said, perpetrator-driven cases, where it started with, this was the crime that was committed. These are the people, or there is a number of people who were killed, tortured, or otherwise, had human rights violations. So you have those two aspects. Now, the fact that they've never made it, or they've never seen a trial date, doesn't mean that that information doesn't exist. So this, of course, is when it comes to that cooperation with the ICTY and now the MICT is critical, because the more information that the domestic jurisdictions are interested in, the easier or the more effective it will be for the MICT to research its information and then be able to support the domestic investigations. So, I hope that helped a little, just to put a little light on, it's not only what has been adjudicated in trials, but what has been investigated. Now, having said that, just one last point. Investigations are normally, and investigators keep this information very confidential. So it's not easy to have access, a la carte to this information. The information has to be requested by, official authorities, or parties that can actually present themselves for doing humanitarian work and so on. So it's not as simple of let's go and check the collection and let's enter into the data. All of these aspects are related to criminal investigations.
Thank you, Thomas. I wanted to ask you, all three of you, I suppose, when bodies are found, finally, when we discover a mass grave, what problems can arise then? Are there problems with misidentifications, or what can come up as an issue?
No, we have more than 1,600 people missing, and still it's a big question, taking into consideration the history of Bosnia and other countries dealing with this issue. It is still a kind of general fear if they will be found, but if most of them or all of them will be found, it's first is matter of, because many families don't believe that identification, because sometimes they just receive just a small part of the body, just a small bone of the party. And here in Kosovo have happened many wrong identification. I met many family who several times were reopened the graves, and there were identification and other examinations. So and some others have buried them and say we don't want to open graves anymore, despite the fact that they may be, they will not, or maybe they will not have buried their family members. But above all is justice. If the people will be found, all of them. Because in most of the cases, justice has not been served. So many people were killed and disappeared, but perpetrators are not convinced yet. So are not convicted yet. So I think this is the main problem.
I was reading and researching that in Bosnia and Herzegovina they were burying people in some sort of common graves in order to avoid redigging the graves once they give the remains to the family or what is supposed to be the family.
It's kind of big drama for every family, because they receive one just small and several months or years later they receive another part of the same body, and it's again reopening the graves is really ongoing drama for many years here in Kosovo, and yeah, it's devastating for many of family members.
I'd just like to add one detail. One test re-exhumations were done in a region of Mitrovica, and out of 77 exhumed mortal remains, the percent was found that 13 bodies didn't match, which is a serious, very serious problem, addressed also now recently by ICMP and European Union and International Committee of the Red Cross. And, it's a big obstacle, and it came as a result of the fact that in 1999 and 2000, the Inicijativa or OTP, several ad hoc teams were exhuming mass graves, but the primary function was that to prove the widespread nature, of crimes that happened, and there was not so much good coordination, and there weren't good transfer of information onto the next institution that later came, and this is the period in which the means of identification were only traditional identifications, and DNA just started in 2001 in Serbia regarding, but then it's in 2003 officially in Kosovo after ICMP signed the agreements with Kosovo or UNIC. So this is really a big problem now, because there are around 400 unassociated mortal remains in morgue in Pristina, and at the same time all families of 1,600 gave the DNA samples. So there has to be some identification which could be solved only in a way that all families of victims must again, or for the first time give the DNA samples, which will help that, at least the number will be decreased for these 400 and make some kind of significant improvement on this issue.
Thank you, Pedja. We also have one question from the audience, now that we're here. It says, in terms of sources of information and verification, is there a deadline after which it will be impossible to establish the destiny of the missing? So what problems the passage of time is actually causing?
When it comes to identification, DNA is the most secure way to, but it is about the investigation and finding people, because many people have died during those years, and many witnesses are not anymore alive. So people are dying without having any chance to shed light on atrocity, or to shed light what they know about the missing person, especially when it comes to those who are responsible for hiding the bodies. Because during the year, many people who were witnesses, but also the many people who were responsible have died during this year. So this is another additional problem, and as the time goes by, this problem will be harder and harder to deal with this issue. Will be more difficult to deal with this issue, because of the time has elapsed that the memory of some people are not as it was before. So it's another problem.
Yeah, definitely agreed on everything what Serbeze said. So the passing of time doesn't goes well on all of those efforts. Also in regard to the criminal justice and the perpetrators, and also in regard to families and sources of information. But I will just remind here that, you know, even in Spain nowadays there are initiatives that victims from the Franco-fascist regime are, you know, like again being exhumed, identified. So this in a matter of, you know, like if there is a will, if there is like political context that is proactive onto this, so it couldn't just vanish so easy, you know.
If I can add something.
Yes, of course, Thomas.
No, I think that, you know, families will not rest until they learn the fate of their loved ones. I think that, you know, all of us here have worked with victims and victims' families, and you know, the issue, yes, time does not work in our favor, but the issue will not go away until the fate is solved. The second point is, yes, there's been a lot of misidentifications and you know, in the last 25 years, since the conflicts in the Western Balkans have occurred, there's been a lot of technological advances and a lot of useful tools. ICMP has done an amazing job at establishing a methodology, but also the technical capacity to actually do DNA analysis. Unfortunately, we will have to deal with some of those mistakes from the earlier days, or not. I have talked to families that, you know, they know that their loved one is gone. They know that it happened that in particular area, and whether or not it's in this grave or right next to it or so on, many would like to leave the past, and they are satisfied with the one bone that has been identified through DNA or whatever. Others have not. It really is. I think that it is very lonely being a family of a missing person or someone, and really to get satisfaction. I think you know, the duty bearers really need to do a lot more to be convincing, to be forward about the work that's being done. Yes, there are technological problems and there are mistakes, but a lot of that is easier solved if the families can see the will and can see the work that's being done. I think that's a very important point.
As Thomas said, that many wrong or misidentification has happened after the war, because that time, during that, in the intermediate after the war, Hague Tribunal experts were exhuming the people, the killed people, for the sake of investigation. And during that time, families didn't wait for any DNA, because DNA started to apply it a bit later. They just started to identify them based on clothes, mostly based on clothes or other belongings. So the scale of misidentifications or errors happened during that time. So it was during 1999, during 2000. Because later the chances for misidentification were a bit lower.
And just one fact, there is also something that came from the witness statement. In some occasions, perpetrators forced victims to change clothes before they were shot. So this was all intentional, same as in Srebrenica, why they were transferring victims from one grave into another and into third graves. The only intention was to postpone the process of identification and everything that comes after. So this is intentionally, as Thomas said. I think it's a good point that, ICMP really did a great effort, because this recollection of bones, it helped. ICMP identified around, I think, 25,000. In Bosnia, again, I'm bad with the figures, but I think that number of people in Bosnia identified is, just one moment. So, 15,000 cases, but number of samples collected is several times. And in Bosnia, you have the same case that family receives the part of the body, and later it receives more and more, associated part, which really made this process much harder than it would be, if the perpetrators had a clear intention that made this job. So it wouldn't be fair to let them win if, this initiative for finding missing persons stops exactly because of the passing of time.
Thank you. While the families are waiting and hoping to find their loved ones, what is their status? Can they get any sort of reparations? Can they get any sort of legal?
In fact, not reparation. Reparation is kind of financial help, the kind of pension. People in Kosovo takes around 200,000 euros per person. But it is not a reparation, because the reparation is something when state paid. For example, if Serbia takes responsibility for the crimes and for it decides to give reparation to the victims. But in this time, we have to do with the kind of pension, kind of financial support, not a reparation. Reparations.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. In Kosovo, victims are in a better position because of the law of the missing persons. They have a status as victims of the war. But while in Serbia, there is no such law, and families of missing persons are in a much harder position compared to. But it's not only about, of course, about some kind of redress or something. There is no psychological support for the families of missing, and if we also acknowledge that majority of the missing persons are men, which means that many women were left alone with their families, with no, not enough, funds or for their families. So this problem is just multi-layered. It's not just financial, but also psychological and on many different levels also.
When we're at that, how important is it to the families to be seen and heard? And Serbeze, especially, you are writing about the families of the missing, and they have the opportunity to voice their problems and their concerns. How much importance is it to them, and how much it would mean to them to have a physical memorial, for example, like the one suggested in Batenica by Batenica Memory Initiative?
In fact, yes, because they feel themselves abandoned, they feel themselves ignored, and they want to emphasize this issue, to be seen and to be heard by the others. You know that everywhere. Victims in Kosovo were not, I cannot say respected, but firstly the focus was in the war, and to glorify heroes or soldiers or guerrillas killed during the war. So while the victims were more invisible, when not only those who are missing, but the others as well. Only in the recent years, public started to change, or to us to give a bit space for the victims, because all the times we have memorials and other things which show much more, or give space to the heroes, or glorify the war and fighting, and much less space for victims. So for that reason, victims feel still a bit abandoned or ignored by not only by the institutions, but by public in general.
Thank you very much. We also had something similar from questions from the audience. It said that it wanted to know what is the situation like in Kosovo. Are Kosovo authorities interested in this topic? Since we 2 days ago saw a group of citizens of both ethnicity gathered to demand justice in Pristina. Those are the families of the missing. They were first in Pristina, and yesterday they had a conference here in Serbia. It was both Albanians and Serbian families.
Yeah. Public discourse has started to change in recent years, especially after the establishment of so-called special courts, Kosovo specialist chambers, which is a court located in The Hague, in Netherlands. Because some of the KLA leaders who are in power, who are strong actually, or hold senior positions, have started to speak much more for the victims, for the crimes, because of the court. So when it comes to the narrative, general narrative is still a bit orientated or biased, because they use victims, they tend to use victims for the political agenda. So that is the problem, why in the recent year they want to speak much more for the victims, for missing persons, and us much more for responsibility.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Serbeze. Do you have questions for each other, Predrag and Serbeze, before we take a look from the questions of the audience?
Maybe somebody from the, okay.
You can ask me something first.
No, maybe somebody from the audience have any question? Not?
Yeah,
okay.
There is a question from the audience that asks what kind of law regulates this kind of issue in Serbia. So what kind of law regulates the status of the families of the missing?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question well. Can you just a little louder?
What kind of law regulates this kind of issue in Serbia? It was referring to the missing persons.
Yeah, there is a regular law on civilian victims, but you know it also includes many other categories, and families of missing persons are not entitled. They're not a separate category in this law, but first they must have a separate process in which they must declare their family member as deceased in order to get the status of civilian victim, which is, you know, like which is for many families something humiliating while they're waiting, you know. And as Serbeze said, many of them are or were hoping that they will find a family member alive. They must, in the court, some kind of process, they must declare this person as deceased in order to have some kind of benefit. So there is no special law on missing persons, and Serbia didn't fulfill many recommendations for example, from the Committee on Enforced Disappearances to amend the law and legislation and include the families of missing persons as a separate category without some additional requirements to undertake.
And when they are declared as deceased, the search for them stops, right? So the families have to choose whether they want their loved ones to be.
Yeah, they have to choose, and it's been complicated in regard to some economic and property issues, because some property was entitled to a missing person. Then there are so many complications, and also agency in this time long ago were suggesting like some amendments to existing law, but until today I think that there is no change, not changes in that status.
Yeah, Peja, you mentioned a very important thing, because I have seen many problems when it comes to properties here in Kosovo, solving the right of properties because of the missing fathers, mostly because you know that traditionally most of the properties, houses and lands were in the name of males. So, yes. And missing persons have caused many problems when it comes to their children and grandchildren to solve the problem or to share their fear.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, there are many administrative problems. For example, in Bosnia, after the Dayton Agreement, this was far more successful process of property restitution than it was like in Kosovo. In Bosnia, it's around, I think, 200,000 requests were successfully solved, which is also important for also return of the refugees, which in Kosovo also, it wasn't so successful after 2000, which is all related, of course.
Thank you. We have some. We have one more question from the audience. Serbeze, you said that the Kosovo population, on average, trusts the NGOs and other civil rights organizations more. So the question is, does the Kosovo government cooperate with those organizations in any way?
Yes, to some extent they have cooperated, mostly with the Humanitarian Law Center, but this cooperation was not so much. For example, when it comes to documentation of things, Kosovo authorities and society in general have failed, because it is kind of paradox, can I say so, that Humanitarian Law Center is still the most credible reference when it comes to war crimes and documentation, or documentation of the crimes. Because, yeah, I say this thing frequently, because it's paradox for us as Albanians that organization established by a Serb lady is the most credible reference still, more than 20 years after the war, for the victims, documentation and gathering information for the victims in Kosovo.
Thank you. Peja, how do the authorities in Serbia look on the work and the numbers found by the Humanitarian Law Center?
Just Serbeze reminded me of one thing that happened last year. There was some I don't know, was it in Security Council or General Assembly of United Nations? There were some Serbia-Kosovo talks, and I read it in a brief report that both the Taci at the time was present and the Vučić at the same time. They were using the number of 13,500 victims in Kosovo as, they were both using Humanitarian Law Center data, that it's part of the data that is publicly available. And so, but at the same time, I think that the Kosovo side was trying to show as the all victims were like in Kosovo are Albanians, while the Serbian side was trying to show that many of Albanians were killed by other Albanians, which was the case, but not to the extent that they wanted to show that it was happening. You know, there are a couple of cases, of course, several dozen of cases, but you know, like the Serbian side always wants to show that more, just larger number of Albanians were killed by other Albanians in their political or other struggles during the Kosovo War. So, you know, this is a real acknowledgement by both governments, but still it shows how still, you know, when you have information, you have ethnic distribution of this information, everything available, you still want to use this information in a way that it suits your interest, which clearly shows that, you know, like political agenda is above all more important than the victims themselves, as Serbeze also said its case in Kosovo, and as we are witnessing in Serbia in the last 2 years, the total radicalization of this victimhood and in the official narratives, which, you know, like it's a total revival of some war rhetoric, and especially coming from the Ministry of Defense, but also from the other actors from the official institutions.
So they are referring to your numbers, but they are not cooperating with you, and they are manipulating them the way it suits them.
Yes, kind of.
We have one more question for Serbeze. It says, does the dissolution of ex-Yugoslavia play a role in the Kosovo context of the issue?
Again, because I couldn't hear the whole...
Does the dissolution of ex-Yugoslavia play a role in the Kosovo context of this issue?
Yeah, I think the big dissolution on the issue.
Yeah. Okay, is there anyone else from the audience that would like to ask something? Thomas, do you have anything to add? Okay.
No, not really. I mean, the topic is still wide open, and the question now is, will civil society use the momentum now with the I don't know if it's a renewed dialogue, but there certainly is a need for a renewed dialogue to insist that the missing persons issue stays top on the agenda. We heard in the last week missing persons being mentioned quite a bit. I think that now is also yet another opportunity to insist on closer cooperation and once again re-engage in providing information, providing support to the duty bearers to keep the issue of the missing very much on the agenda, but also from the technical side, because we assume that there is, you know, the documentation is available, that, you know, everyone knows everything, it's either being hidden or amended, but is that necessarily the case, and is it that widespread? I think that, you know, there's still a lot that we can provide in terms of support.
Exactly. And since the dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina will continue in September, I would like to know what would be your political message to those in power? Serbeze or Peđa, whoever wants to go first.
As Thomas said, maybe it's a very important process for both Serbia and Kosovo societies to put much more pressure to solve not only the problem of missing persons, but is the huge burden in our arms, which is the past, because it is important not only for dealing with the past and to re-establish peace and reconciliation between two ethnicities, because without solving the problem of missing persons and prosecuting war crimes, it will be hard for both societies, especially for victims, to think that peace, especially reconciliation, with something possible for this generation of people. I am afraid that this process is a bit muted, or society, especially civil society in Kosovo, is a bit muted, because here is this huge propaganda and it's a kind of political agenda because of the special court, and people are frustrated because they see this court as a bias and something which is against the Kosovo Liberation Army image, and for that reason I think the civil society is not so strong as it was in some other things. I don't know if in Serbia civil society will be more successful to pushing this issue much more, or to have a much more impact on this issue.
Well, I really don't know what to say as my closing remarks. I'm a kind of pessimistic related to overall success. Maybe some of missing persons would be found in a period that comes, based on some efforts, some additional efforts jointly from all actors. Because as Thomas said, only recently, for example, just the YIHR documentation, which was attributed to each of the battalion, like Spanish, Italian, became accessible just a few years ago, for example, to International Committee of the Red Cross. And International Committee of the Red Cross also, as also Thomas mentioned, had an access from recently to OTP database, which is all the factors that could very much contribute to this, and also the willingness of Serbia and also willingness of Kosovo to provide a safe, safe climate for people that are willing to approach and share some information that might not be treated like traitors in this constellation as it is now, but to be treated as a kind of true humans who recognize the suffering, everyday suffering of the families of missing persons. And I think that this, their suffering is imperative and most important thing, to end. So we are now marking 20 years. It is a long time, but as I said, just recently some additional things happened, and some new strategy and some kind of new technologies, both in identification, DNA identification, and technologies about some other things that also can help and contribute, and also the willingness to find as much possible, and of course civil society and journalists and other people interested in this topic would, as they were doing through all this period, continue to contribute in their capacity and in their power.
Thank you, Predrag. I hope that the officials and the negotiations will work on improving the situation for the families and the missing. Since there is no more questions, I think that we covered everything. I would like to thank you very much, first of all, to two of you, and then to everyone in the audience for your time to join us, for your insights and your questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
It was a pleasure to discuss with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Serbeze. Thank you.
Thank you.